Okay, so what we're going to talk about now are with unstressed and stressed syllables, we're going to talk about patterns and rhythm. So in this sentence, we have stressed and unstressed syllables. And so I'm going to go through now and we're going to mark the stresses and unstressed just as a quick review. So as I said before, I like to start with words that have multiple syllables, and that usually gives me a starting point on how to look at other words around it. So the one I'm going to start off with is honestly. Is it honestly, honestly, or honestly? I honestly can't believe you gave it to us. Honestly, do you hear how we put the emphasis on? That pretty much means that est is going to be unstressed. Now, lee is sometimes it's stressed, sometimes it's not. So I'm going to take a peek at the next word. My is a pretty soft word. It's one that doesn't have a lot of meaning, doesn't need a lot of emphasis to say. So that's going to be unstressed, which means this is probably going to be stressed. I'm going to keep looking at this. My sock is. Of those three words, sock seems stressed. It's one that we have to say longer, wider, louder. Honestly, my sock is. Whereas is so short, it almost gets combined with sock. My sock is kind of what we end up saying. Sliding, we talked about how endings are usually, not always, but usually an unstressed, especially ing, because we end up saying it like saying instead of saying, which means the slide is stressed. But honestly, my sock is sliding off. Notice how we put more emphasis on off. Okay, let's take a look at this area. The next word I want to look at is around, because I'm pretty sure I know that. I walk around. I almost have to round out my mouth to say round, which means is unstressed. I walk. Of those two words, seeing that this is unstressed, walk seems to be the stressed, and I seems to be unstressed. So I walk around like everything. I don't really put a lot of emphasis on like, not like I do ev. Everything. What do we need to get? What do we need to bring? Everything. Ev. Can you hear how we put a lot of emphasis on ev, less on re? And then thing, let's listen to it really carefully. What do you need to bring? Everything. We do put some emphasis on thing, so I'm going to mark that as stressed. Is fine, but of those three words remaining, especially next to a stressed and a stressed, that's probably going to be unstressed. That's going to be unstressed. It's rare to have three U's all in a row, so this is probably going to be stressed. Okay, so that is our review, but now let's start taking a look at rhythm, pattern, and beat. What I hope you're starting to notice is that it's not always perfect, but a lot of times we have a pattern. Now, there are all different types of patterns in poetry and language. Some of them are stressed, unstressed, unstressed, bump, 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 bump. Sometimes they are stressed, unstressed. Sometimes they are unstressed, unstressed, stressed. There's all different types of combinations, and they all have very long, difficult to pronounce names. The one I'm worried about, the one that is the one you need to remember, is this pattern, and that is unstressed, stressed. And I'll explain why in a minute or later, but what we need to know is this has a name, and that name is called iambic. Iambic means we start with an unstressed and then have a stressed. And that's the pattern. Now, a foot is how many times a pattern is repeated. So if our pattern was bump, 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 this would be a foot, this would be a foot, and this would be a foot. The final word we gotta remember is pentameter. It looks like pentameter, but it's called pentameter. And that is when there are 5 feet, otherwise known as a pattern repeated 5 times. So this is repeated 3 times, it would be a triameter, tri as in 3. If it were repeated 8 times, it would be an octameter, an octometer. If it were repeated, let's see, 10 times, it would be called a decameter. So pent means 5 feet, or a pattern repeated 5 times. So this is my pattern. It is iambic. The amount of times it is repeated. Okay, so once again, all of these boxes are my feet, and then it's repeated 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So that is considered a decameter. If it's only repeated 5 times though, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, if it ended right there, it would be a pentameter. Okay. Now, why is all of this important? Well, Shakespeare uses this quite a bit. His favorite way of writing a sentence is to make it iambic pentameter. Iambic meaning this pattern, pentameter meaning it's repeated 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. And then Shakespeare even ends up taking this a step further and doing some really cool stuff with it. We're going to talk about that later, but for now, just make sure you're comfortable with the word iambic, foot, and pentameter.